Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are finishing the book of Exodus. We are coming to the place where we have the people coming together to complete the Mishkan. We studied, was it last year or the year before? We studied kind of that whole, Zornberg and some other folks commented on the drama of that moment. Would the fire come down? Would the presence be there? Would it work? Would they be forgiven truly for the golden calf? And would God's presence rest among them or not? So we come to the height of that drama, and that's how the book of Exodus closes. And then we will get, of course, next week we will begin the book of Numbers. All right. So we're going to look at Pekudei. Sometimes this is a double parsha, Vayakhel Pekudei. And so I want us to focus this year on part of the opening text and the closing text. And we're going to look at some commentary around the opening of our parsha and the close of our parsha. So we're going to look at this opening verse and remember this second word in the text, Pekudei. So this is the name of our parsha. Most parshiot are named for one of the words that comes in the first sentence of that parsha. So it's not named as a topical name. It's named, each parsha is named for a word that comes right at the beginning of the parsha. So, Ele Pekudei HaMishkan. So these are and then you have to figure out how to translate this word Pekudei. So the shoresh, the root, is Pei Kuf Daled. So whenever you see Pekudei in a row, right, this is the tripartite root that we get in so many words like kadosh, kiddush, right, kedusha. So the three consonants that make up the root. So this root has a lot of different ways to translate it. It has to do with both counting and roles. So like the appointment of duties. It has to do with noticing, with remembering, with paying attention. All of those are related in Hebrew. And so in one of our prayer books, we have that God is Poked Sarah, right? So when God decides to help Sarah conceive, the word uses Poked, right? So that God noticed or paid attention, or did something about a situation, and that is the word we have here. So it's more than just the list of accounting for everything. It's a list that is made. Think of the list a lot of us have just made of the inventory of our homes. So that's what it feels like to me, right? That it's not just a list that you sit down and, I have this book and this book and this book and this book, and I count them and we're done. It's an accounting that is really about taking stock of what's happening. And it has import. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. This list has import. This accounting is important. So this is the accounting of the Mishkan. I almost left this translation to go to another translation because it was starting to bug me. But then when I looked at other translations, I'm like, no, it's actually pretty accurate. So it's not as lovely a translation, the Everett Fox translation, but it really gets at what the Hebrew means. So, right, it doesn't call it the tabernacle here. The Mishkan, right? What is it? What is the Mishkan? It comes from the verb lishachen, shin kaf nun, again, a tripartite root meaning to dwell. So it's really the dwelling, right? Shekhinah means the indwelling presence of God. So again, these tripartite roots are deeply meaningful in Hebrew. Hebrew is a language of depth, not breadth. English is a language of breadth. You've heard me say this a lot. Those of you who've learned with me. So it's this is a language of depth. So every time you see these tripartite roots, each use of them builds on a different use. And so it gives us very rich terminology for things that can only be translated in English by one particular word, because English is a language of particularities and nuance. Hebrew is a language of resonance, down. All right, so these are the accountings of the Mishkan, the place right where God dwells. Mishkan ha'idut, literally in Hebrew, the dwelling place of witness, of testimony. Asher pukad. Now we get the verb form of this pei kuf dalid business. So that Moshe pokaded. So, translate that. Did the accounting, paid attention, made the list, all of the things that would go into this noun. Now we're going to have it in the verbal form. So Moshe is in charge of it. And the Leviim are the ones who are serving in the Mishkan, and they are serving under Itamar, the son of Aharon, right? So we have Itamar and Elazar, because we're not a Benavihu, De'idi. They got burned up, remember? Okay. So now we have Itamar is the one who's in charge, right, of the Leviim and is dealing with this pokading business. So what's being accounted? We'll see. So Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Yehuda, had made all that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh had commanded Moshe, right? So Bezalel is the artist who is in charge of making everything according to Moshe's instruction from God on Sinai. Then with him, Oholiav, son of Achisamach, of the tribe of Dan, carver, designer, embroiderer in the blue, violet, purple, and warm scarlet, and boshesh. All the gold that was made use of in the work and all of the building of the shrine. Melechet HaKodesh, right? The sacred, holy work. All the gold from the elevation offering was 29 ingots and 730 shekels by the holy shrine shekel. So this is by the weight of the sacred measure. And silver accounted for by the community. So this is what's being accounted for, if you will, is all of the precious stuff that both the people had brought and that were then made into the pieces, the components of the Mishkan. And notice what's happening with the kesef, what's happening with the silver. The silver is being used for the casting of the sockets of the shrine and the sockets of the curtain. So both the planks and the curtain over the planks are held in place by silver. That's going to be important later. And bronze, and we get the accounting. So we're getting how much of all of this was contributed and was used in the building of the Mishkan. Okay, so we're gonna see all of the material used in the ephod, right? So the priestly garment, the high priest's garments that are for Aaron, right? So the ephod of gold, blue, purple, scarlet, and twisted boshesh, which is a fine kind of fabric. And we have gold thread as well, right? Then the shoulder pieces. So here we're getting a description of all the things going into making those clothes. We've gotten a description of the clothing. This is everything that goes into the making of those clothes. So this, if you have a breastplate, you need the stones for the breastplate, right? And the gold that it's hanging from on his chest. And so that gives us the breast piece. And we get a description again of all of the precious gems and semi-precious gems that were involved with the engravings, right, of the names of the tribes on them. All right. We have gold ropes and linkages holding them onto the ephod, the priestly garment, and the robe, of course, the skirts of the robe with the pomegranate and bell alternating on the bottom of pure gold. So again, a description of all the things involved in creating the clothing for the high priest, including, as we see here, the thing on his forehead that says Kodesh Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, sanctified for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, set aside, set apart for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Here, this is translating it holiness for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. That's really interesting. Okay. So, and they brought the dwelling to Moshe, the tent and all its implements, its clasps, its beams, its bars, and its columns, and its sockets, the coverings. They bring all of it, the table, the lampstand, all of this, the bronze laver, all of it, they bring to Moshe, right? Everything that they had made, and Vayivarech otam Moshe, and Moshe blessed them. Now, who is otam? Who is they? Who's them? This is either talking about the people or everything that the people brought forward, right? So we're not clear. It doesn't tell us who's them. So Moshe speaks and then starts talking about on the first day of the month, on day 1 of the month, you are to erect the dwelling, right? So you're gonna erect the Mishkan, and he goes through all of the components of that and what that means, and then you are to anoint Aaron and the other and his sons and the Leviim. So this is the putting them in office, essentially, right? And so we get a description of all of that happening. And we like I said last year or the year before, I can't remember which, we studied this whole moment of would it work? And yay, Kvod Adonai Malei et HaMishkan. The Kvod, the presence, the glory, the weightiness of Yud He Vav He filled the Mishkan. Okay, so it worked. Yay! All right, so then we get a description of what happens whenever the cloud moves from the dwelling. Then the people of Israel would march. And if the cloud did not go up, they would not march. So they followed this cloud that ascends off of the Mishkan, right? And it was over the Mishkan by day, and at night it would be fire before the eyes of all the house of Israel on their marches, b'chol ma'asehem, on all of their journeyings, right? Kol Beit Yisrael is singular before the eyes of all of Israel. The whole house of Israel is singular. B'chol ma'asehem, in all of their journeyings, is plural. So this doesn't match exactly grammatically, which is going to be what for the rabbis? An engraved invitation to Midrash, right? Because it doesn't grammatically fit. Kol Beit Yisrael should be singular on all of its journeys, but it says all of their journeys. So of course this is ripe for the rabbis for interpretation. Let's look at the commentary by Rabbah Dr. Mira Neshama Nicolescu, who writes from a mindfulness perspective on Torah, who I'm studying her through I think it's IJS this year. How does Torah remain relevant at all times? This is I'm picking up in the middle of the commentary because it's a long commentary. How does Torah remain relevant? Through its capacity for self-renewal. Surely at every time and season, the Torah is clothed for the needs of that particular time and season. V'vadai, b'chol eit v'zman haTorah mitlabeshet lifnei tzorech ha'et uzman. So this is the Hebrew that I believe she's getting from the Me'or Einayim. Yes, here's the Me'or Einayim. So this line of commentary is from the Me'or Einayim, a Hasidic source, who says that the Torah is dressed in every time and season in clothing that is particular for that time and season. What are the clothing? What does that mean? What is the Me'or Einayim saying? It may be no coincidence that the Me'or Einayim discusses the clothing of the Torah in this context. After all, our entire Parsha concerns itself with the clothing of the Mishkan, with gold, silver, and copper, and the clothing of the priests in tunic, sash, and tiara. Yet these merely serve as pointers to the truth that Torah is always clothed in something, just as the divine, in a sense, is clothed by the Mishkan. The levush, or clothing, can change according to different times and epochs, but the inner nature of God, of Torah, of ourselves, remains eternal. Renewal might be understood as eternity's change of clothes, simply to make its language understandable to each particular era. This is what Jewish mindfulness, the art of being fully present, has imparted to me throughout the various phases of the Jewish calendar. So now she's taking the Me'or Einayim's commentary that Torah changes its clothing for each season to mean Torah is eternally true, but we interpret it differently, right? And it has different ways of telling those truths throughout the Torah. And those speak to us in different ways as time goes on and as our human societies evolve and our thinking evolves. But she's going to go further and say, literally, one of the constants through the seasons, the times, the sacred times that we mark on the Jewish calendar. All right. So what is she saying? One day I dress up in costumes, laugh, and celebrate. This is Purim, which if we mark at the beginning of the year in Nisan, is the last holiday of a yearly cycle. Remember the Jewish calendar began in Nisan, in the spring. The Exodus, right? Remember, we got that whole thing about this is to be the first of months for you, this month that you go out from Egypt. So if that's true, if we go with that and not Rosh Hashanah being in the fall, if Rosh Hashanah is in the spring, the last holiday, she's saying, of a yearly cycle that begins in spring, the last holiday is Purim, which is interesting. We don't usually think of Purim as being the last holiday on the calendar, but actually it is if you look at it this way. So this is Purim. If we mark the beginning of the year in Nisan, is the last holiday of a yearly cycle, a holiday in which redemption comes via human agency in a world in which God seems obstinately absent. Another day I consume bitter herbs and contemplate slavery. This is Pesach, the inaugural holiday of the year, if we start our calendar in Nisan, and a celebration of the birth of our people through divine redemption, right? So what is she saying? If we read the calendar this way, these sacred times this way, the last holiday is us saving ourselves, Esther and Mordecai figuring out how to act in the world to save the Jewish people, and God is not mentioned once. That's the end of the calendar. The beginning of the calendar is God redeems the Jewish people from slavery. I have never thought about that before. That if we read on this calendar, then God is absent by the end of the Jewish year. And we start the Jewish year with God's remembering, and noticing the suffering of the people and redeeming them from slavery. Okay. Then I light a fire and study all night to celebrate revelation and giving of Torah. This is Shavuot. Soon after, I will sit on the ground and mourn the destruction of the temple on Tisha B'Av. But then I will get up and dance for love. This is Tu B'Av, which marks the beginning of my return to my true nature. And then she goes on to say, of course, there's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. These rituals are all clothing of various facets of eternity. Beyond these, there are rituals and symbols that take on new meanings, different clothes, if you will, to adapt themselves to new contexts and times. And his contemporary, in his commentary on Parshat Pekudei, the Me'or Einayim proposes a new interpretation of the Mishkan, that we are ourselves a Mishkan, a sanctuary where the divine presence may dwell. But almost from the time we are born, we forget this truth and estrange ourselves from intimacy with eternity in the present moment. What's renewed is what's eternal, a new cycle, a new life. Just as each breath I take, though it always feels the same, starts a new cycle and the beginning of new life, eternity comprises renewal, and renewal signifies beginning anew. Torah doesn't need a new language to maintain its eternal nature, to preserve its relevance to the present, just as my breath doesn't need to look or feel different to renew my whole being. All I need is to remember to connect with the new beginnings that are constantly happening in my body, in the Jewish calendar, both being living organisms. All right, there was a lot there. I know there was a lot there. But this idea that Torah dresses itself, right, that Torah's clothing changes for the seasons, meaning human epics, human eras, human periods of understanding. So we interpret Torah differently after the Enlightenment, right? Medieval thinkers interpreted it in light of Neoplatonism and Neo-Aristotelianism. Early people interpreted it in light of Mesopotamian and Canaanite, right, cycles of nature and paganism. So like what she's saying, that the Me'or Einayim is saying, is that Torah changes during different human epochs, during different human seasons. The way we interpret the words of Torah changes, and the truths there are eternal. So our job is constantly, like somebody was talking about going back to the property and sifting through, that's our job, is to continually every year sift through these words of Torah to get out what is the understanding that it's saying to us in this particular moment. That is our work. That's our job, right? Is to continue to revisit that. That's how we continue to reconstruct. That's how it stays renewed, and we stay renewed. So that you're breathing the same way all the time, but what you're breathing in is different, and what it's doing in your body is different, depending on what's happening with your body and what's happening in the environment, right? So we didn't do a lot of breathing outside right after the fires because breathing's the same, but the air was different. And what my body needs right now is different from what it needed 6 hours ago, right? And so it's going to do something different with that oxygen based on what I need right now. This is the process of renewal, constantly renewing. So we're involved in that by our will to continue to revisit the truths that are eternal and dressed differently for different seasons, as well as to actually mark our engagement with the different seasons and how we celebrate them on the Jewish calendar, and what it means for us each year to re-engage with the idea of Purim leading into Pesach, Pesach leading into Tu B'Shvat, that to lead into Tisha B'Av, which leads into Tu B'Av, which leads into Shavuot, right? So we continually renew our understanding of the times as they change as well. The actual seasons of the year and the ways that Jewishly we mark them and what we're marking and what we're celebrating and what we're commemorating at those moments. So that's our obligation too, from a mindfulness perspective, to pay attention at springtime to the rebirth and renewal that's happening all around us, right? That's our work, is to pay attention. We're given ways to do that through what we call tradition. And that is a constantly renewing practice, because it's different all the time. Each Pesach is different, right? Each of us is coming into something, birthing ourselves, our story, our whatever, new this year differently than last year and the year before and all the years before that. So this is our commitment. It's by staying present to those changing things, we get in touch with what's eternal and renew ourselves, and bring ourselves to a place of being able to see what's new and what is eternal. So a very complicated, I know, set of linkages, but I mean, I just thought, wow, that's profound for me. Anyway. And I've had way too much time to prepare this Torah study because I didn't teach last week. So sorry. All right. Anything anybody wants to say before we move on to the next reflection on Pekudei? Yes, Bert.
How new is this idea in Jewish? How far back does it go? The idea of renewing Torah all the time and re-understanding it. Isn't that where the rabbis were coming from 2,000 years ago?
Mm-hmm. Yes, right.
Not a contemporary. It's not. I guess my point is, it's not just like a contemporary thing.
No. It is the deep, deep, deep wisdom of Jewish tradition that says, yes, Atem nitzavim kulchem hayom. Y'all are all gathered here at the foot of the mountain. Hayom, today. The early rabbis interpreted today to mean today. That's eternal. God is constantly engaged in revelation. Are we paying attention? Right? So that it's a very old way of understanding Torah, is that, yes, it sounds contemporary, right? Because finally post-enlightenment thinking got there, right? That we see things through our own time and whatever, and interpret it for our own time. But it is a very, very old understanding for us of what studying the sacred words is actually about. And that Torah is constantly being given and constantly being, the oral Torah is constantly being given through interpretation. Alex?
I might be too literary, or might have too literal or missed something. So then if we are this interpretation of the connectivity of these holidays and this renewal after Esther and Mordecai, saved the Jews. So then how do we make sense of the high holidays? Is that then just another holiday of renewal and reflection and atonement and those pieces? Or let me make sure I understand your question. So what I hear you saying is, if we read the calendar the way I just did, the way she just did, with the new year being in spring, what does that do to the high holidays? Like what is the meaningful mark in time of the high holidays? And yes, it would be a time of reflection and assessment of, how am I doing? How am I doing living into what I say are the values, that I'm supposed to be living up to? How am I doing? And then asking forgiveness for the ways that we're not, and resetting as we come to the last harvest festival of Sukkot, of the agricultural cycle, right? Because remember, Sukkot is the end of that calendar. It's the last harvest festival of that calendar. That's originally probably what Yom Kippur was, actually. It wasn't the beginning of the year. So was that whose lens was it, or who applied that idea of Rosh Hashanah release as a demarcation of the new year?
Folks who were exposed to Babylonian religion
and Babylonian tradition celebrated the crowning of the king in the fall. They would recoronate the king in the fall, and that was their new year. So the rabbis who had been, so the people who had been exiled, the leadership who had been exiled to Babylonia, were exposed to that and were no longer living an agricultural cycle in Israel. So comes down to they responded to what they were living in, and the fall becomes the celebration of the new year, and Yom Kippur gets linked now to the first day of that new year. But originally, it probably was the end of the liturgical calendar. It was the end of your year. Sukkot was the final festival before the winter when nothing grows. So that was your last food source. So if it went well, you lived. And then that meant you wanted to clean everything up with your neighbors. You wanted to, and God, before that final celebration of the year. So actually, Yom Kippur probably was the end of the year.
It's really interesting.
It is really interesting. And it makes more sense, really, than you celebrate the new year and then 10 days later, you take all this time to say, I'm sorry, and clean things up and beat your chest and blah, blah. That doesn't make a lot of sense, really. We've made sense, right? But really it makes way more sense that you would be doing that right before the final party of the year so that you can go to the last party of the year before everyone goes home for the winter, knowing you've cleaned everything up. So that horrible thing I said to Robert Goren at the last gathering, I get an opportunity to say, I'm sorry for that before I run into him at the Sukkot party, right? That makes way more sense. All right. Thank you, Robert, for being gracious and forgiving and all of those things. Rachel.
When you were reading that first commentary,
Mm-hmm.
and this is very literal and sort of a simplistic way to see it, but I was thinking just about the example of Sukkot and how, so it's almost like on some level she's saying, so we just go back, we can keep referring back using it as a resource for how we can, find ways to make it applicable now. And so isn't that what the Maccabees did? Right? Plain and simple, right? And that goes really far back, right?
Yes. It goes all the way back to the 3 pilgrimage festivals because they were originally Canaanite agricultural festivals.
And the dedication of the temple when you're looking for, right? So, and in the example of Hanukkah, right? So if you're the Maccabees and you're looking for a dedication dedication ceremony, you're going back to this portion here because that's where this, it's the one we're reading today and saying, right. So I know that's very literal and she was speaking in a much, less literal way, but I don't know. That was the first thing I thought of was.
Yeah, yes and no. I think she's saying both. I think she's saying exactly what you're saying, that it's as old as even the creation of a holiday like Hanukkah, is what I hear you saying.
Right.
They look back to the dedication of the first temple and they model the dedication on Hanukkah, becomes an 8-day festival because that's what they did with the Mishkan. What I'm saying is yes. And even earlier than that Sukkot itself was a Canaanite holiday of festival around, my brain is just not, around the Canaanite way of celebrating the fall harvest, right? So the Israelites took their Canaanite festival and reconstructed it into Sukkot. Yeah. So it's happened since before the beginning of Judaism. Yes. And then it continues all the way through. Pesach was originally the wheat harvest festival by the Canaanites and the lambing festival, right? It was a Canaanite pagan set of festivals for the farmers and the semi-nomadic pastoralists. Israel puts those together into this new Yahwist context of being the liberation from Egypt at the time of the wheat harvest. Do you see what I'm saying? Right. Yes, from the beginning, that's what we did. We reconstructed the festivals around us and made them have Jewish meaning, and we continue to do it to this day with Yom HaAtzmaut that's coming, right? With Israel Independence Day that's coming. Like it doesn't stop. Yom HaShoah, all of those things that we continue to add to our sacred marking of time. Jim.
So what I posted in the chat was, because our consciousness evolves, and what we read in the Torah, what I've read, or what was read in Torah at one time in the past maybe read. I never saw, it's like reading something that I have read before numerous times, but now it's different because my consciousness shifted or evolved. And as well as experience, I'm very much looking forward to our community Seder in a couple of weeks because it's going to be one I've never attended before, but it's also in light of what we have gone through, with the fire, even though I was not directly impacted, but many people who I know, like yourself and many were impacted. So it's going to have a deeper meaning for me, than, because this is, for me personally, this is something different that I haven't experienced, but within the context of what happened 3 months ago with the fires, that's what I'm saying is that we go through experiences in life and but whatever we have lived through or experienced may take on a greater meaning than previous.
Yes. And there are eternal truths, right? That remain as well. So it's both, right? Which is profound that they're both true, right? Anyway, I'm reading Yitz Greenberg's magnum opus now. At the end of his life, he really decided to write what he believed was his core teaching. And anyway, so it's talking about the universals, of Judaism that are expressed through a particular people and our language and our holidays and our whatever, but that the pull towards universalism, which I read in your chat comment about, like the privilege of being part of the human experiment of trying to make the world, right, for everybody a better place through our particular ways of doing that. All right, Lisa?
First, let me just ask, what's Yitz Greenberg's book called? Sounds good. What is it called?
Mm-hmm.
What's the title?
I forget.
Oh, okay.
I'll send it.
I just want to make sure I understand this right, because this seems so mind-blowing. What you're saying is that Pesach is essentially the beginning of God's relationship with the Jewish people, from which we can't go back because back is Egypt and forward is this unknown way. But that the end of the year is Purim, where God steps away and says, "You're grown up now, and do it the way you're going to do it. You've got all the lessons, you've got the Mishkan, you've got everything you need. This is it. Go forward."
Yes.
Is that what you're?
That's what I kind of read in the commentary, and
it's truly profound.
It really is, and I've never thought about that before. I know you've heard me teach, many of you, that Sukkot was the end of the year, but I didn't think about it past the time of Torah. If you right now, this is the first time I've ever thought about that cycle of the holidays being Purim. Right, I've always thought about it as Sukkot. But it's like, there were things after Sukkot. There were things after, the biblical observances. And if you think about it that way, it's very interesting that the last holiday is God. Okay.
Yeah, this is all in the midst of, there have been a number of articles now about Christians appropriating Esther. There was something in the Times, I think this week, the name Esther. They do these Esther festivals. They're like appropriating the whole Purim story in a Christian context that completely, I think, apparently misreads it. But this is not what that is at all.
I'm surprised it took this long. I mean, they've appropriated Passover so long ago, like Jesus is the lamb and you're putting the blood of the lamb. It's like, what took them so long to get to Esther? That's sexism. What are we going to say? All right. Bert, then Margot.
You mentioned Yitz Greenberg. I was listening to a podcast of his where he was putting forth the idea that starting back in Exodus, that God was very, very involved in the world and what was going on at sea and the Ten Commandments and whatever, and that over a period of time, God has progressively stepped back and removed itself from the world and left it to human beings. And that this was how he explained a more modern interpretation of Torah and what's going on, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, so that's exactly the first part of his book. And it's called The Triumph of Life, Lisa. And in that, Bert, yes, he, I had a thought. You can't take a break from this stuff for 2 weeks.
That God was very involved in the world.
This is what happens. Thank you. So God withdraws. God does tzimtzum, continues to do a loving contraction of itself, capital I, and we are obligated by that to live into the covenant and hold up our end. And it's in our hands, that God has put it in our hands. And the whole project is to move towards life, more life, expansive life. And that's why the book is called The Triumph of Life. So the covenantal relationship is expressed through God's withdrawal, but it's a loving withdrawal because God, like Lisa said so beautifully, you have all the tools. I've given you everything you need. Now do your job. Be me. Act godly in the world. I've given you everything you need to do it. Now, as they would say on, the Enterprise, engage.
One of my favorite quotes from H.A. Heschel is that God is hiding in the world and that it is our job to make God visible through mitzvot.
That's very Greenbergian. Yes.
Yeah. Well, or Greenberg is very Heschelian.
That too. Margot.
Yeah, totally. Just a quickie on all of this. I really love Pekudei because it's like a conclusion or like the final act of a grand opera. Exodus is there's a lot going on in Exodus. So I feel like with Pekudei, it just kind of brings that grand conclusion that we see that ends an act of a great performance, right? But, for me, who's a little bit more kind of out there and mystic and really interested in Jewish time and, Rosh Chodesh, the KI Rosh Chodesh gathering is just really resonant for me. Because as we all from Adar to Nisan, this is a spring New Year is, I think, felt by, I guess, these constructs of time that came from the ancient world really did mark this is the new year. So going from Pisces, where we're kind of dreamy and wrap things up, into Aries, where we're fresh start, plant the seeds, let's go, new year. I really love how, Rabbi Amy pulls in how there are different pagan holidays that are still preserved through Jewish tradition that really are, agricultural land-based traditions of art. And so to me, that, Jewish time is cultivated by agriculture. Shout out to Rachel, Farmer Rachel in New York, and some of us trying to get started too. But I just feel like it's a very embodied practice to be aware of Jewish time and to see how our holidays is tied to our. So
beautiful.
Thumbs up.
Beautiful. Yeah, there's a lot there. One of the commentaries I read that I didn't bring forward, I'll see if I can find it for you, Margot, but it talks all about Rosh Chodesh, that there are 4 Shabbatot in Nisan, leading from Adar to Nisan, and each one is important, and each Rosh Chodesh, yes, anyway, I'll see if I can find it for you, but it's this beautiful teaching about Rosh Chodesh and about the 4 Shabbatot leading from Adar to Nisan.
I would love that.
All right. What do we have time for? Oh my God, how does this happen? Y'all, each time I'm like, okay, I'm going to bring a little less and not try to give them so much. I love this commentary by Noah Farkas. He is the head of the Federation now and has a weekly Torah commentary. And he's talking about this Parsha, of course, and he says, again, this is right in the middle of the commentary, so there's stuff before it, there's stuff after it. Religion is art, he says. It's an imaginative process that bridges the chasm between the way the world is, science, and the way the world should be, ethics, right? So Yitzhak Greenberg would say that's what the whole covenant is about, moving from what the world is to what it should be. Faith is the most human thing there is. For we are the only species on the planet that can dream of social, moral, and spiritual transformation. It is a special and unique form of art that does not just capture the world in image and deed, but tries to transform the world through image and deed. It is where the finite, infinite meets the finite, where the immaterial meets the material. Each of us is an artist. Each of us is handed a paintbrush when we are born. Our lives are masterpieces, and religion gives us the palette of exquisite colors to make it something beautiful. In this week's Parsha, Vayakel Pekudei, we finally get to see how humans partner with God to create the potential of what religion can be. After dozens of chapters in Genesis and Exodus, we arrive to this moment where God stops talking and the people finally act on their own.
The Israelites, having been at Mount Sinai for a whole year, can now finally build the Mishkan, the holy tabernacle that is the center of biblical religion. The speaking is paused and the making of religion has commenced. 36 times the word for making, vaya'as, is used, more than any other section of the Torah. This is no small matter. The rabbis teach that the tabernacle is as important as the whole world because it is where God turns over the religion to us for the first time. The tabernacle is where the dreams of humanity meet the dreams of divinity and the world is transformed. Oh, I don't know. What can I even say? I mean,
we have that. I want that.
Yes, absolutely. I will send it to the list, right? That is like, whew, go Rabbi Farkas, right? Oh.
Is it in Sefaria?
No, this is from a weekly Torah commentary that he does that I either subscribed to or found or whatever, but was like, whoa, each of us, right, is given a paintbrush the moment we're born. Oh my God. Okay. And finally, looking at that contradiction at the end in that final verse, Rabbi Martin Margolius from the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, the Hebrew grammar in the concluding verse is striking. Though the text speaks of the house of Israel as singular, the possessive plural, ma'asehem, their journeys, is plural rather than singular. As we noted last week in exploring Parshat Vayakhel, the process of building the tabernacle directs our awareness to the underlying oneness and interconnectedness of creation. Yet the narrative at the same time also describes a powerful metaphor for the indispensability of each unique element and individual contribution, whether of material, time, and or skill. Pekudei details accounting the elements of erecting the Mishkan and reveals that each component and offering is critical to the whole, regardless of how seemingly small and insignificant. Rabbi Larry Kushner once observed that in building the tabernacle, although at first each person who contributed to the Mishkan considered that offering to be extraordinary, afterwards, once they saw how their several contributions to the service of the tabernacle were integrated, all the boards, the sockets, the curtains, and the loops fit together as if one person had done it all, then they realized how each one of them had depended on the other. They understood how what all they had accomplished, curious what that word is, was not by virtue of their own skill alone, but that the Holy One had guided the hands of everyone who had worked on the tabernacle. They had only later merely joined in completing the master building plan so that it came to pass that the tabernacle was one, quoting Exodus 36:13. Moreover, the one who made the holy ark itself was unable to feel superior to the one who'd only made the courtyard tent pegs. Kushner stresses that even one whose contribution appears minor and meaningless, such as one who contributes the lowly tent peg, ultimately is equal in significance to one who contributes to making the holy ark. The equality stems from the uniqueness of each role, not from whether it seems of higher quality or significance. Therefore, creating the tabernacle provides an opportunity not only to see oneself as part of a collective project, working in concert towards sacred ends, but to witness the unique and infinite value of one's particular role in the process without comparing it to that of others. People, which is what we spend 90% of our time doing. Yichud, uniqueness, means cultivating appreciation of one's own precious singularity in the scheme of creation, absorbing the reality that there has never been and there will never be again any person who is exactly like us, right? We're each given a paintbrush when we're born, and that no one else can do precisely what it is we are here to do in our time on earth. As we have studied and translated into practice the lessons of the creation of the Mishkan, we have learned that it involves individuals having nidivut halev, willingness of heart, and as well as a sense of kesher, connection, envisioning the multiplicity of reality as a manifestation of the underlying oneness or interconnectedness of creation. So related commentaries in my experience, right, that it both, the Mishkan is both a representation of all the many different things we need, all of the things that are unique about each one of us, but it represents, right, all of those coming together and holding together in a way that points to the oneness, the unity of all things, the push towards, as Greenberg would say, life, and universal human values as expressed through our particular texts, our particular practices, our particular times, our particular observances. And as we start approaching Pesach, let us do that with deeper and added, after our study this morning, kavanah, deeper intention and awareness and a sense of being fully present.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday Morning Torah Study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.